So we have Daryl, we have Becca, and we have Katie, so we can start. Yeah, perfect. Okay, do you want to start, LJ? And then I'll take it on.
Okay, Donovan. Okay, well, first of all, I'd just like to say thank you, everybody, for being here and for being willing to participate. We're really looking forward to this forum and the outcomes of the forum, just because we are collaborating two global campaigns together. And I know that we both perhaps have, different visions and missions, but I think essentially the point of this forum itself is to come to a conclusion where we incorporate both the vision for sustainable development goals as well as gender equality and what women's roles, or perhaps what the sort of vision for women within that agenda of sustainable development is. So that's really what we're looking for the outcome to be, is and the role of youth in this initiative, and how we can actually mobilize something tangible and real solutions for the real issues that we are facing with sustainable development at the moment. Okay, so yeah, welcome to everybody. And I think Donovan can take over from here. He will introduce the agenda for today and outline and introduce some of our speakers.
Sure. Thank you, LJ. Pleasure to see everyone here on the webinar. We're very fortunate to have you join and hope you'll enjoy it as well. So today, it's a very exciting global forum. It's unique such that the Youth for SDGs Youth for SDGs campaign, is collaborating with the Equality Campaign in our shoes, as well as sort of a guest appearance from Katie from the Asylum Connect campaign. So we're very excited sort of to be merging forces. As a youth campaign, well, we're all youth campaigns, we feel that a collaborative and collective approach is always more empowering and more powerful, because we can find the links between our respective sort of initiatives, and together move towards shared goals. And those shared goals that we'll be discussing today are the Sustainable Development Goals. We'll give us a very quick background. The SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, are a set of 17 goals that are accompanied by 169 indicators that were sort of developed over a span of several years with the recommendations of both governments as well as civil society, youth, everyone around the world. There was a big campaign called My World 2015, by which over 2 billion people provided responses as to what is sort of an ideal vision of society by 2030, and what are we expecting of humanity and of our planet. So it really outlines the trajectory and the path for sustainable development over the next 15 years. And it's meant to be a very collective approach, whereby everyone in society has a role to play. So it's not only the governments who are sort of accountable for that, but it's also the individual. And as youth, we're especially excited to host these webinars and launch these campaigns, because we hold a very special role in the Sustainable Development Goals. As youth, we currently stand in a very sort of interesting position, because the politicians are the ones accepting the goals now. However, by 2030, we're going to be in their shoes, so similar to In Our Shoes campaign. We're going to be the ones responsible for truly achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, and as well as maintaining them for the next generation, which is, our late careers and our children's lives. So we sort of hold the responsible, we're the key bearers of society. We're the generation that can achieve these goals or not. So one of the best ways to do that is awareness and education, and that's where the webinars come in. These forums are meant to be interactive. We hope you'll ask a lot of questions to our wonderful speakers, and we look forward to a very sort of exciting discussion. The topic, as mentioned by LJ, will be the role of gender equality and women in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. So The agenda for 2030, which highlights the Sustainable Development Goals, specifically states that gender equality remains to be a key challenge that needs to be addressed. Because it realizes that gender equality is not an isolated issue, but rather is a cross-cutting issue within development, both in social development, economic development, well-being, health, and all other aspects of a person's well-being. Therefore, it's important that it is incorporated in every aspect of development. For example, in workspaces, ensuring gender-sensitive programs. Gender is highlighted in Goal 1, which is to eradicate poverty, since gender inequality is our big driving force of unsustainability and poverty. And it's also raised in goal number 4, which is education. So the links between education, empowerment, both for women as well as the LGBTQ community, to ensure that they can also be fruitful contributors to society, but also have the avenues to be fruitful contributors to society. And goal number 5, which will be discussed a bit later, is all about this theme of gender equality. So we're going to start our discussion a bit broadly. We have 3 sort of guest speakers that will be featured with us today, and they'll talk about sort of the importance of gender equality in different contexts, mainly in the context of development. So first we have Daryl Tadik from Philippines. He's a global youth advocate for My World and the World We Want 2030. It's a UN Sustainable Development Goal Action Plan, formerly known as the UN Millennium Campaign. So he's part of their global office and mobilizing a lot of youth activism over there. He's also a recognized scout for the Planet and Earth Hour every day and Hero of Earth Hour Global and Worldwide Fund. So he has a lot of experience. He used to be the My World Youth Coordinator in Philippines, and has plenty of experience in trainings as well as events, which hopefully will help enrich the discussion. We also have Becca Heath. Becca is currently a senior at Boston University. She'll be graduating in May. She's studying environmental analysis and policy, and she helped start the chapter of She's the First here on campus, which is an international organization that works to promote, support, and enhance the education system for young girls in low income and low resource settings. So they're currently sponsoring the education of young women in about 11 different countries. And then finally, we have Katie. She's the coordinator for the Asylum Connect campaign, which is a volunteer initiative that seeks to improve LGBTQ asylum seekers in the US with life-saving online informational resources. And she'll give us some good insight about that. So I'll turn it off over to them since they really have all the exciting things to say. So they'll each speak for about 10 minutes. We'll try to keep time, and then we'll open it up for Q&A for all 3 of those speakers. And then we'll move on to the second half of our webinar, which is about women in social entrepreneurship and the global gender equity agenda, which Chiara and LJ will get more into in the next hour. So I'll turn it over to Daryl to start off. Thank you.
Hi, a pleasant good day to all of you. I was part of the team of creating the post-2015 development agenda here in the Philippines, because as we all know that the Sustainable Development Goals was created and consulted by millions of people. And one of the crowdsourcing, we call it as a crowdsourcing platform, where people was consulted on what are the top priorities that they want to somehow voice out and reach this survey to the world leaders and include it to the high-level panel discussion of the post-2015 development agenda. And that's the My World 2015. And let me show you the data, or let me tell you about that data, that we already covered at 9.7 million votes all over the world. and 4.9 million are from male, and 4.6 are from female. And the age, uh, the most dominant age that voted in the My World 2015 is from 16 to 30 years old, which is 54%. But let me also emphasize with you regarding on a report uh, gearing up on from Millennium Development Goals to the post-2015 Development Agenda. So as we are gearing up to the new development agenda, um, the SDG per se, it was adopted on September 25, 2015. But there are some recommendations from the MDG 2015 report regarding on the issue of women. So while much progress has been made towards women's and girls' equality in education, employment, and political representation over the last 2 decades, many gaps remain, particularly in areas that were not addressed in the MDGs. To achieve universal realization of gender equality and empowerment of women, it is critical to address the key areas of gender inequality, including gender-based discrimination in law and in practice, violence against women and girls, women's and men's unequal opportunities in the labor market, the unequal division of unpaid care and domestic work, women's limited control over assets and property, and women's unequal participation in private and public decision making. Gender perspectives should be integrated fully into all goals of the post-2015 development agenda. And where some of the highlights outcome documents for women are the Beijing Declaration, Platform for Action, and the recent adoption of Addis Ababa Action Agenda and the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development Goals, wherein you can see the 17 sustainable goals are all in effect with women. We would like to emphasize the SDG for gender equality and peace, justice, and strong institutions, the reducing inequalities, and for decent work and economic growth, and at the same time for good health and well-being, and for the quality education. I think that's the end of my talk.
Perfect. Thank you, Daryl. Thank you for giving us a nice context of sort of the importance of the role of gender in the SDGs. We'll turn it now to Becca. All yours, Becca.
Okay, thanks. Hi, my name is Becca. I'm a senior here at Boston University. So I recently started a club on campus called She's the First. Like Donovan said, it's an international organization that works to bring scholarships for young women around the world. And here on campus, we're doing just a little bit of our part to try and help the larger organization as a whole. So I'll just talk a little bit about what we do both here on campus and as the organization as well. So we found both on our campus and for the national organization that there's a positive connection between educating girls and lowering mortality rates, specifically maternal mortality rates, delaying childbirth and family size, improving hygiene, but also you get an economic return when you invest education for girls, higher than you would for men in the area. So girls who are educated in the long run are more likely to marry later, bear fewer children, educate their own children, and then be less vulnerable to both sexual abuse and coerced sex. So we work in 11 countries. Of them, the notable ones where we are most, most involved are Ethiopia, South Sudan, India, and Nepal. Those are the areas where we find our organization can do most of the work and gain most of the support that we're looking for, as it is hard to go into a country. So what we do is we sponsor girls in specific schools throughout these countries. We have 650 girls who are currently being sponsored. And sponsorship for our organization means fully funding their education, and it's secondary education. So often when we think of secondary education, we might think of high school or college level education, but for these girls, it's often considered elementary education, as there really isn't a lot of secondary education in the area. But what I should say is that when I say sponsor, I don't just mean the cost for school. I mean the cost for books, for uniforms, for transportation to and from school. And we also go into the households of the girls that we sponsor to make sure that they're able to do their homework when they get home from school, and that there's a solid environment for them to work. So I started here on BU's campus. So there are many chapters throughout the United States, and some growing throughout the world. And what we do are more like supporters. So we are active supporters of girls' education, and we rally our campus community to further our mission to sponsor girls. So it's a lot about fundraising here on our campus, but it's a lot more about getting the word out. It's pretty hard to do when you connect with professors in campus administration, but our work tries to promote the idea that women should have an equal opportunity as men. So the work that we do focuses on harnessing technology, social media, and sponsors that we have as part of the international organization that help us try and rally the students around it. So like Donovan and a few others were saying, we kind of combine Sustainable Development Goal 4 and 5 to work for us. So we've actually used the promotion of the SDGs kind of to our benefit. And we've been able to foster first generation graduates, and we cultivated a next generation of global leaders. Mainly we're working with our NGO partners, scholars at primary and secondary schools, and we are still very new to this whole international scheme. The overall international organization is just about 5 years old. So we're still trying to get our word out there, and the more interaction we can have, the better. I would say my favorite part of this whole experience has been realizing that all the funds that we raise here on campus and for the international organization, 100% of them go to the girls. So that's a really cool thing that I didn't think was actually possible, but it is. So that's pretty much it from me. If you have any questions, I'd love to answer them.
All right, thank you, Becca. That sounds wonderful. It's nice to see sort of, shifting from understanding to practical action, right? What can we do on the ground with your local communities and engender some change in culture and, motivate some effort. So now we'll hear from Katie. Again, she'll present. And then after that, we'll open we'll open the floor for discussion and questions to all our three speakers together, since it's all big related topics. Katie, it's all yours. Thank you.
Thanks, Donovan. Hi, everyone. My name is Katie, and I'm the co-founder of Asylum Connect, and I actually have some slides, so just bear with me while I share my screen. Can you guys see it? Good? Perfect. Okay. So I'm here today to talk a little bit about gender in the LGBT community and how the LGBT community is kind of redefining gender. So I have a bunch of slides, so I'll try to run through it relatively quickly. So I think the first big question that a lot of people take for granted is, who is a man? Who is a woman? And then who gets to decide this? I think those are three really crucial questions just to keep in mind as I'm going over the next slides. So what does gender look like in a binary society? So I think a lot of people have just a traditional notion of what makes a man or what makes a woman. So these are just two pictures of what you might think of. And then what is a family in gender binary society? So again, it's a wife, a husband, and children. So gender in binary society is really looking at sex and gender and putting them into two distinct opposite categories of masculine and feminine. And I really just want to highlight that in the binary model, sex, gender, and sexuality are really assumed to default to align. So I think that's a really important point, and that kind of thinking really does exclude LGBT people. So what is gender in the LGBT community? So sometimes the bravest act is just the courage to be ourselves. And so I took this quote from Where Love is Illegal, because what the LGBT community really does and was a pioneer in is distinguishing between sex and gender. So biological sex really refers to biological and physiological characteristics. So it refers to male or female, like anatomy, while gender really refers to behaviors or expectations, the cultural learned significance of sex. So it's a distinction between masculine and feminine. And so I think a really obvious example that a lot of people think of in terms of the LGBT community is transgender people. So people whose gender identity differs from the sex assigned to them at birth. And I think it's important to highlight here some celebrities that have spoken out that are transgender because they obviously know the experience better than me. So I took a quote from Laverne Cox, and she said, "It's more than just our bodies. This is really how you see yourself," which I think is really important to keep in mind. Another very famous transgender celebrity right now is Caitlyn Jenner. She said, "I'm saying goodbye to people's perceptions of me and who I am, but I'm not saying goodbye to me. This has always been me." And so I think that's a really important concept to keep in mind as well, that being transgender, again, is not a choice, but it's who they see themselves from a very young age, usually. But there's still a lot of progress to be done. So I took some statistics from the US. One of them that stood out to me is that transgender people are still 4 times more likely than the general population to report living in extreme poverty. Nearly 80% of transgender people report experiencing harassment in school when they were young. And then again, while Caitlyn Jenner, has done a lot for the transgender community in terms of visibility, it's very important to realize that most transgender people, most transgender Americans even, are still greatly disadvantaged, both socially and economically. And the other thing that I wanted to touch upon, not just transgender people, which is the obvious thing that a lot of people think of, but also how the LGBT community is trying to break through the binary. So it's really seeing gender not as 2 distinct categories, but as a spectrum. So what does non-binary mean? So non-binary is saying that there's no longer just a man or a woman. So it's challenging traditional notions of gender. So for instance, some terms that people aren't familiar with, I just put here, gender queer, gender fluid, you can read the definitions there. On the right is a picture of Jaden Smith, who I put there because I thought that quote that you see at the bottom, that he broke the internet with repeated appearances in skirts and dresses, is just very interesting when you think about it, because why are people so upset that a boy is wearing skirts and dresses? I think the important point to really emphasize there is, why do people care so much? Ruby Rhodes is another very prominent example right now, someone who doesn't identify as a gender. So she said, for the most part, I definitely don't identify as any gender. I'm not a guy. I don't really feel like a woman, but obviously I was born one. So that's kind of the thinking if you do identify as gender fluid or gender queer. And then Miley Cyrus, again, I don't relate to being a boy or a girl. I don't have to have my partner relate to a boy or girl. So here I wanted to highlight that there are many different combinations of gender identity and sexual orientation. So for instance, Miley Cyrus identifies as both gender fluid and bisexual. And I think that a really, really important thing to realize, and that a lot of people don't realize right now, is that gender identity is not tied to sexual orientation. So there's no distinct alignment. And so you can be, a transgender woman who likes women, or you can be like Miley Cyrus, a gender fluid person and bisexual. And I think that the LGBT perspective and community has really just opened up all of these possibilities. And I think that's the main difference. But however, unfortunately, in many parts of the world, having the wrong gender expression and or sexual orientation really does remain fundamentally unsafe for a lot of people. So this is a picture from Where Love is Illegal. So facing questions about his sexuality, Amqua, a gay man, had to marry a woman. And I just thought that this image was very captivating and powerful. And then another picture and quote from Where Love's Illegal, Cheyenne is a lesbian from Brazil. And when she was 15, she was raped by a classmate to learn to be a proper girl. Again, this is the thinking that is tying sexual orientation to gender identity and is very, very harmful for a lot of people. So who am I? So I, again, am the co-founder of Asylum Connect. And as Donovan mentioned, Asylum Connect works with LGBT asylum seekers in the US. And so this is just a quote I took. So some of the people that we help are transgender asylum seekers. And so transgender asylum seekers are especially visible and vulnerable to harassment and persecution. So they're coming to the US because in their country, their gender identity puts them in harm's way. So Asylum Connect is really trying to help people like Denise, who is a transgender woman from Trinidad, who fled to the US in 2004 after being brutally assaulted and humiliated by police because of her gender identity. So how does Asylum Connect promote inclusivity in society? So I wanted to touch upon one of the things that we did recently called the Shadow Speak Up Instagram campaign. So this campaign is running from January 15th through the 29th, and it's designed to raise awareness for LGBT asylum seekers. So the basic premise of the campaign is that you post a picture of your shadow on Instagram with the hashtag Shadow Speak Up and kind of some of your thoughts on why our campaign is important. The Shadows concept is designed to allow asylum seekers to participate in the campaign because for many asylum seekers, when they do arrive to the US, they still value confidentiality. And so if you post a picture of your shadow, your identity isn't disclosed, but it's also letting you take a stand. And I think that in terms of what Asylum Connect is trying to do through this campaign, it's again to increase visibility and increase awareness for LGBT asylum seekers, but also I think gender identity and sexual orientation issues at large. So these are just some example shadow pictures that we've posted. And then briefly, the SDGs and the LGBT community. So equality for whom? So I've read a lot of articles that have been very critical about the SDGs and kind of the lack of addressing the LGBT community in the SDGs. I think one really obvious thing that stands out to me is the word, using the word woman on such a consistent basis. That seems like such an obvious thing, but it's also going to alienate a lot of people that, again, are gender fluid or gender queer. And I'm not going to read all of this, but as you can see, this is taken from Past Blue, which is a project of the Rolf Bunch Institute, the CUNY Graduate Center in New York City. But it's basically saying that SDGs are actually excluding LGBT people and it's not addressing all gender identity choices. Just another quote from a Nigerian development expert who had been leading the working group drafting the new development goals, who actually publicly declared last September that gay rights were off the table due to, again, that the very persecution that people do face worldwide. And I'm not sure if that's a great thing to say publicly, that it's off the table, but I think it's a really interesting thing to think about. And so I think for my thoughts on how the SDGs, how will they kind of resonate with people and how will they be effective for the LGBT community, I wanted to end with this quote by Ruby Rose. The takeaway is that only you know who you were born to be and you need to be free to be that person. I really think the SDGs need to reflect this reality to be effective on the ground for many people that do, again, identify outside of the binary society. And I would love to answer any questions. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks so much. Very nice to hear sort of, expanding our perception of what equality is, and in terms and context of gender. So I think you're the great person to talk about that with the campaign.
Thanks.
So we've heard from Daryl, Becca, and Katie, three very different perspectives. So complementary perspectives when thinking about gender, in the context of the SDGs and sustainable development. So now we want I'm sure you have a lot of questions or interested in sparking some discussion. So we'll open it up with we'll open up the floor for questions. Feel free to unmute yourself and then ask the question.
Hey, hi there, Becca. Hi, sorry.
No, go ahead. Make sure you point out who you want to ask the question to as well.
So hi, the question is for Becca. I was kind of interested because you guys are working towards, let's call it, you're basically delegating responsibility, kind of in a kind of structured manner, across the different countries in which you're working in. So that's really commendable, and the way that you've been organizing it, and it sounds very structured and it's very clear when you send across the message. I could totally understand different types of positive impact that has been created by you. I had this one question that just came up in my mind. It's that since you guys are kind of, let's say, working or partnering with NGOs in the different countries out there, how do you ensure that the quality is maintained across these countries? Because the countries you mentioned have different dynamics of their own, different types of environments, and different types of methods in which each country should be approached, and different medicines for different types of people, simply. So how do you ensure that that happens? And also at a very micro level, let's say Nepal or India or any other developing nation where you're working in, there are lots of micro issues that come into the game when you talk about working with women. Let's say in a village setup, men do not, in a certain village, let's say, men do not allow women, to even go out of the house or even go and talk to anybody, any outsider, be it a man or a woman. So how, as an organization in the United States, how do you ensure that this barrier is crossed somewhere very far away, maybe in a Nepal or in India, where the woman is interacted with and made to understand that you should totally, work with us so that you become a better individual? And so how do you guys cross that divide, and how do you maintain quality across so many different countries?
Yeah, sure. That's a huge and a great question. Our organization works to make sure that we fully understand the area that we're going into before we actually do it. So each time we start, say, a new area that we're going to work on, there is years and years of research done before doing it. Our organization also works on a basis of interaction. So we go in and work with local leaders, but we also make sure that we have people here in the United States that are well aware of the different areas. So me, for instance, when I was growing up, my family moved around quite a bit across the world. And because of that, I was able to really understand specific areas. So I lived in Ethiopia for a couple of years. And because of that, I know the area very well. So in my time working with Choose the First, my focus has been specifically in Ethiopia because I know the area, I know the land, I know all the different issues there are specific to Ethiopia itself and surrounding areas like Djibouti. And those two have been probably one of the most complex that we've had to work with. India, for instance, which is one of I easily can say one of our biggest nations that we've worked with, has been extremely difficult. The NGOs that we specifically work with are based within the countries that we go to. So that does give us somewhat of an advantage. We get to work with the head of the NGOs that are actually from that area. And a lot of the time it's challenging. It's not an easy thing to go in and try and change the nature of the community itself. But we receive support from local leaders. So we do work highly with the people, even if they aren't elected officials, the community leaders or the elders often that are basically in charge of the area. We also work to make sure that the boys in the area aren't being left out of the situation. It can be something that we don't want to alienate anyone in going in and working specifically for young women education. However, that happens, people get alienated. So we have set up partner programs with these NGOs to make sure that the people in the area are all receiving the same sort of support. So I guess it's less of an education only organization, but it's more of a providing services for the entire community in the area. I hope that answers your question somewhat.
Okay, well, Becca, if there isn't a follow-up to that answer, we'd just like to also say that we are really looking forward to perhaps connecting to your organization, since our campaign essentially advocates for gender equality, not only within South Africa, but also internationally, but we really would like to start mobilizing projects within our local area, because there's this severe disparity between the certain socioeconomic classes and the quality of education that girls are receiving, especially in rural areas. And what we also finding is that access to sanitation is really, it's a severe barrier to providing girls with, although the access to equal education is there, because of the lack of access to sanitation and healthcare, girls aren't able to essentially have access then to the equal education. So that's the barriers that we're facing at the moment. We're also facing a lack of sort of family planning education, sexual health education. So what happens is we have a very high rate of teenage pregnancy, and that's the issue is almost compounded when you take into account the social grants that are given out by the government and social services. So it's almost as if it's a system that's encouraging teenage pregnancy and not combating it, when those resources should perhaps be used instead for education and empowerment. So that's more or less the issues that we're facing in our local communities. But we actually wanted to really ask you, we're quite interested in the fundraising projects that you've had and what your success is on those fundraising projects. So could you perhaps elaborate a little bit for us? What projects have you had, and what is the rate of your success, and have you found some projects are more successful than others?
Sure. Yeah, I absolutely can talk about that. I do want to say that sanitation was one of the biggest things when I went specifically to Ethiopia that I noticed was the problem. For young girls who are just beginning their menstrual cycles, there's no place for them to be able to feel comfortable and safe about it. So that is something that we as an organization, it's one of our main problems that we face when trying to implement education in these areas. So fundraising for me specifically has been a campus fundraising goal. So I'm not, unfortunately, able to really talk about the larger organization, only what we've done here. We've had many different campaigns, I guess you could say, that we've run. They usually last about 1 month, so that we have a crunch time and a period in which we can fully fundraise. We've done something called Sweat for STF. So STF is She's the First, and Sweat is working out, I guess. And so we hold kind of a 24-hour dance marathon. As part of it, we go to, I don't know if you ever heard of like the cycling gyms, and you can actually log how much you've done. So basically you log this and people have been following you. So it's kind of a weird conjuncture with the goals of Michelle Obama, who is trying to say get off the couch and go outside and work out. So we've kind of meshed that with our idea, and we've been pretty successful with that. Overall, each semester, my specific goal usually increases. This semester, it's $600 that we are trying to raise. We are already, we started on Tuesday for our semester, and we already have about $300. So I'm hoping that we fully surpass that within the next 3 months that we're here at school. The larger organization works, I know, on a few different campaigns. They sell obviously paraphernalia, so t-shirts and bags and jewelry and things like that, and that's a major source of income. But they also work similar to World Wildlife Fund or another larger organization, and asks completely for just donors. And so it's more of a donor type former and larger organization. What I will say is that recently we've gotten some cool celebrities to kind of help us really ensure that we are getting our word out there enough to, I guess, the community of donors that we're looking to engage with. So one of them, for instance, is Deborah Messing. She was on Will and Grace. She's a celebrity that has worked with She's the First, and has promoted our word out there to a larger community. Fundraising is the hardest thing that we have to do. I would say it's not easy to ask for money for people. And especially here on a college campus, it's pretty impossible to get college students to want to give money and not get anything out of it. But we try and say that what you get out of it is an enhanced knowledge of what the world might need. So.
Thank you so much. I can understand that raising funds is one of the biggest problems, but something else that I wanted to ask, I know you spoke about that initial interaction that you have with the students about, making sure that they have a home to go to where they can actually do their homework, but I just wanted to know if there's some kind of support system once they're in the project. I know we have a lot of first generation students at our university, and once they get in there, they're so happy to get in there, but they don't know exactly how to support themselves while they're in there. So they don't really know about, the workload or things like that. They don't really know how to handle that. So I just want to know if there's some kind of support structure that you guys specifically do in another organization.
Sure, yeah. So what we have are basically little outlets. We're not able to provide support due to the size of our organization constantly, but about once a year in each location, there's a representative that is sent to the area to make sure everything is running well. Additionally, as part of the education, we have introduced more technology to the area. So in many places, we can actually Skype in to the area and make sure all of the girls are doing well. As part of the initial creation of the school or the education system that we put in place in each area, there is sort of like an orientation in which we gather the entire community to let them know of what we can do, what we can offer, and if there are any problems, what to do. So if there's a major flood, for instance, which actually did happen to one of our schools, it was completely destroyed. We knew in about a couple of days, which is, but on our standards, pretty good. And we were able to go and get on the ground and make sure that the problem was remedied. It's difficult, I would say, for first generation students and for especially their families. A lot of the times you'll find families that are kind of disgruntled or annoyed that we're coming into their areas, like I talked about earlier. But we've had a few really cool success stories. For instance, one girl from Nepal, she finally learned how to read by the age of 10. And she was talking to one of the people that had been there, and she told them that she actually taught her mother how to read as well, which it was incredibly helpful for her mother as she ran one of the local businesses. So she was not able at that point to manage any of the money transactions, and because her daughter taught her how to, she was able to fully increase her business, but also there was a sense of support there in the system, which is hard for us to do as we're here in the US and they are not. So
thank you so much again, Becca. I'm sure we will stay in contact with you, and perhaps, you know, we could start a chapter at our university, or we could run a project with your organization. Okay, then Katie, I actually have quite a few questions for you as well. Thank you so much for sharing about what your campaign is doing and what it has accomplished so far. And I think it's so essential to address that point of the SDG goal number 5 and the wording of it, because I think that's something that we've also discussed in how we, you know, what our approach is to gender equality. Should we focus and emphasize the sort of the focus is on women and girls, and completely negating to address that we still, it's almost, we wouldn't want to enhance that gender stereotyping. If you know, so my question essentially really is, how do we address these inequalities that exist in society without polarizing gender, so without sort of pulling one gender stereotype in front of the other. So for example, when you are launching certain campaigns, then you don't necessarily want to place focus on, well, specifically women and girls, but rather the entire approach of human rights as a goal in society for everybody. So how do we should address that?
I think that's a really good question, and I wish that I had like a very direct answer. Unfortunately, I think it's a very hard question to answer, but I think one of the ways that we can do this, and I definitely, like, when I read the quotes about the UN person who said that LGBT rights is off the table, I definitely got the point where I think she said that because she thought that it just wasn't realistic to introduce the topic of transgender people or the gender spectrum in certain cultures. I think that's a very good point. I think that there's something to be said for kind of recognizing the reality that you can, you know, say, you know, use these pronouns or advocate for transgender rights, but in many countries it is still very dangerous. So I think that the real question is, how does the on the ground reality change? And I think that in my experience, if I had to give a recommendation in terms of when you launch the campaigns, I think it's just, even wording is just so important. So I don't personally have like, so I identify as like a cisgender woman, so I don't have, you know, personal experience in the gender issues, but I've definitely spoken with people who have, and I think that pronouns, I think, can be very alienating. So even if like something very small that people just don't think of, like if you look like a certain, like if you look like a woman and people are like, you know, miss, or they call you her just off the bat, I think that one step, but maybe a smaller step, is just asking someone what pronouns you want to be used when you're being referenced. I think that it's an easy step to take. And I think a lot of people are like, oh, like I'm just going to assume that you're a man, but that can be very kind of box people in. And then the other thing, again, is just visibility. It's just, I think it's just so powerful when you do have someone that stands up and explains that they're, you know, transgender and what they've been through. I just think that putting a human face on a cause like this is just so important, which is why I put the pictures of the celebrities who I think have done a good job in speaking out for it. So I hope that kind of answers your question.
Hi, I'm Samantha again. Hey, so I had this sort of a question that popped up when you basically talked about what Asylum Connect is all about. You know, like when you give a kind of a, you know, like summary about what your organization is really looking forward to doing and is doing currently, including the Shadows Speak Up. It's really commendable. You know, it's a very simple campaign, but it's a really amazing campaign, and it's beautiful, really, because it speaks common language across countries, across borders. However, the thing is, I had when we talk about LGBTQ as a community, you're really talking about community A, and then the community B, which is the normal community, as in whatever is considered to be the normal community, right? So, as I believe, the issue is really about that brick wall between community A and community B, and the fact that these two communities cannot really come together like in the Venn diagram, right? So, does Asylum Connect do you guys basically, have you worked upon, or are you planning to work upon any sort of an initiative or an idea or a collaborative thing where you actually get certain members of the community to openly, have a face-to-face discussion with the non-LGBTQ people? Like there is one thing of, for example, having a video conference or maybe talking on a chat forum, but this other thing, face-to-face communication is so powerful, so that itself can bring down barriers in the matter of a few seconds. So is there any thought whatsoever or something of that sort where you plan to bring both the communities together face to face physically and maybe just talk it out, have maybe a bonfire discussion or something of that sort, where is anything on the cards by chance? Just an open question.
Yeah, thank you for that question. That's a good question. So to be clear, I think Assam Connect, so the Shadow Speak Up Instagram campaign is not that's not the primary thing that we do. So actually, I'll just go very briefly. The primary thing that we do is we're trying to create the first online centralized database of service providers for LGBT asylum seekers in the US. So the basic premise is that when an LGBT asylum seeker arrives in the US, they don't have anywhere to go. They don't know, where to go to housing, food. They don't have any social support. So the idea is to go on our website and then have a list of resources that can accommodate them. Just to be clear, that's the purpose of Asylum Connect. But I think that's a really, really good question if we're going to try to bridge those gaps. And I think that there's definitely a divide right now, unfortunately, between like LGBT community and then people, the normal, what you said was the normal community. I would say visibility, and I would say Asylum Connect, again, that's not really the purpose. The purpose is to, again, help the LGBT asylum seekers, and the secondary purpose is to raise awareness for both global LGBT rights and, put a human face on it. But to answer your question, I do give presentations in person about global LGBT equality. I also write a lot about it just because for me, again, it's been super important in my life. And I think for people who maybe don't look a certain way and you wouldn't be able to tell, that's their sexual orientation or that's their gender identity, I think that's one of the ways that people can break down barriers, right? Because I've had a lot of people, be surprised by my like sexual orientation. And I just think that, when you realize that it could be like your friend or your sister or whatever, it kind of, you take a step back, and then that's kind of how I see the LGBT community kind of connecting with the non-LGBT community, is through that person-to-person interaction, through the friend that's gay, the family member that's gay, the person walking, across the street that you would never think was gay when you pass, but they are, and just realizing that it's just one factor of a person. Does that kind of answer your question? Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. The thing is, actually, the reason I asked this question is because, I was born in a place called Calcutta in India. Yeah. And there we, basically in India, we have a particular word for transgenders. It's called hijra. Hijra. Yeah. So basically, it's a very stigmatized. It's a word that is very that is very negative. That's not really if you say the word, oh my God, what the hell did you just say? That sort of thing. It's a hush thing. Although everybody knows about it, they walk among us, but and they dress differently. They go around begging alms, and they really look down upon. They look down upon not the worse than beggars because you ignore beggars. And here these people are considered dangerous. Like parents tell their children, don't go near them. You don't know what might happen. So as if like this, like they're gonna do some witchcraft on you and do random stuff to you. So it's pretty bad out there. And in case if you're interested, there is a few years back, India's first online queer radio station started functioning. It's called Radio Q. So I was doing a story for a magazine, so I had to go around, kind of interviewing them. They're a really beautiful thing, a really small startup that started off, and they have dedicated shows day in and day out, which addresses LGBTQ rights and brings those people on board, and they talk about stuff. They have, those love chat sessions where they give love advice and all that stuff, really all of those things, which kind of tries to amalgamate them into the society in some way possible. So if you're interested, maybe just try and, if you guys are interested, you can maybe talk to these guys if you're interested. Yes.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Yeah, again, I just end by saying that it's just important. Like, I think the most powerful thing is just to realize that like an LGBT person is a person and that we're all people. And again, it's just one factor of your personality. So yeah, great question.
Perfect. Thank you. Those are great discussions. I have one question for Daryl. before we move on to the second half. So you mentioned that in the My World 2015 survey that sort of dictated the development of the SDGs, you said that 64% of the respondents were between 16 and 30 years old, which is exactly sort of our youth generation. So I'm interested in hearing, I don't know if you know this, but what is sort of the regional spread of people who highlighted the importance of gender equality and the fact that it's not yet achieved, and that it should be they should be a main component of the SDGs. And then, as we move on to the implementation, follow-up, and review phase of the SDGs, what is our role, the 64% who submitted responses to the My World 2015, what is our role for My World 2030, right? How does our responsibilities shift from recommendations to actual implementations of actions, and shifting from, just knowledge and resources to actual implementing change?
Hello. Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. Regarding on the My World 2015, there's a 54% of 16 to 30 years old who voted on their top priorities. Let me share to you what are the top 6 priorities that the youth want to somehow to share to the world. The top one is a good education. The next is better healthcare. The third one is better job opportunities. The fourth one is an honest and responsive government, and affordable and nutritious food, and protection against crime and violence. I cannot say that because we just covered male and female regarding on this matter. Um, Regarding on how we rolled out the My World 2015, we emphasize somehow the importance of the marginalized and the vulnerable, and the indicators for the Sustainable Development Goals was created and consulted by separate uh, pool of experts, and it was consolidated by the secretaries of the post 2015. But for us regarding on the gender equality, um, we have to make sure that the data analytics are somehow balanced regarding on the gender, because the My World asks also about your gender, your age, your educational background, and that will somehow define the human development index at the moment. And you're asking me regarding on the My World 2030. This is somehow a unique thing for plan for the next 15 years. My World 2030 will somehow create an awareness campaign, but at the same time, it will somehow look on what are the top 6 priorities again of the citizen, and after that, there will be a question that on each goal that you choose, are you satisfied on the work of your government? So you have to rate it from 0 to 5. 5 is the highest. And for the My World 2030, we want the youth to be the advocate or the ambassador to somehow deliver it to their local governments, because on the My World 2030 survey, we added what particular city are you from and what country. So on in the process, another data support group will gather all the the data and somehow will collate it and identify which country, which city are uh, which country or city need to be addressed regarding on the sustainable development goals. So somehow this is some it come up like a monitoring on the development of the SDG on the local level. I can share to you the link, but for My World 2030, it will be launched on March, soft launch on March, but you can visit already the website on myworld2030.org. Hope that I answered your question.
Sure, no, thank you. Please do share the link so that we can, the participants here can look at it, especially when it launches in March, and then later on we can share it as well with our respective campaigns to really get the word out. But what I really liked of what you said is you mentioned community-driven accountability. So community-based, citizen-based accountability is that we have to sort of keep our local municipalities and governments accountable for these agendas and goals that they took on, and they gave their sort of seal of approval that they will achieve these by 2030. Now it's up to us to remind them of that and push them towards achieving those goals.
Yes, I do agree. And let me add also, for this platform of My World 2030, if you want to somehow address or if you want to ask the community regarding on your personal advocacy related to SDG, you can create your own survey on your own selected survey questions, and there will be a My World library where all the discussions related to different topics related to SDG, for example, for gender equality and inequalities, they will collate it and somehow will submit it again as a result of the citizens' engagement, and it will be somehow show the baseline for the sustainable development goals.
Perfect. That sounds great. We look forward to the launch.
Yes.
Thanks so much to Daryl, Becca, and Katie again. I'll turn it over now to LJ and Kiara, who are going to help to mediate the second half. So we have a lot more speakers coming up and exciting discussions. So don't want to take any more time. Thank you again.
Well, thank you to all the speakers from the first half of the Global Forum, and thank you again, Donovan, for mediating that. We'll move on to our second half, where we will be introducing the topic of women in social entrepreneurship. But before we do that, we will just share what we sort of our main vision for our campaign and what we seek to achieve. And we're hoping to inspire some potential partners out there. So, or if anyone that who might be interested in what we have to share and offer and perhaps collaborate on. And then after we've actually dealt with the topic of women in social entrepreneurship, we will then move on to our best practice session, where we will have the MCN fellows share what their sort of sharing the skills and knowledge of best practice, and they will be dealing with leadership in an integral way. Okay, so firstly, our campaign is basically centered on the Sustainable Development Goal number 5, and that's to achieve gender equality as well as empower all women and girls. And we want to do that in the following ways, and that's through various platforms from global platform to grassroots. And that's essentially projects and programs that we will launch here locally. We've divided, since we are aware that gender equality is essentially a human rights issue. It's essentially access to fundamental human rights. So we sort of formed our campaign around how do we advocate advocate for awareness and the achievement of those human rights. And what we did was then we said, okay, well, if we have fundamental rights such as basic education or sanitation and healthcare, fundamental rights like equal socioeconomic rights, then where would we sort of start and how do we actually approach the projects that we want to launch? And we decided that we're going to take every month of this year, from till the end of this year of running our projects, that we focus on a different aspect. So if we could run through our program, it basically ranges from February, which is the hashtag he for she, launching the idea of the concept of inviting men to the table. And we're actually launching a hashtag he for she project on our own campus. And that's going to consist of equality parties, where we've collaborated with a couple of residences on campus, and we'll have the different residences. We have sort of same-sex residences, so we've got them sort of female residences and male residences that will join together in a discussion on gender equality and what that means and what it means for men to sort of be active participants for gender equality. And then a key element, especially given the context that we are in as South African students, is the cultural sort of background and the local traditions that's attached to this, to the cultural background of South Africa, especially in a country with a history like ours. Is a very strong patriarchal heritage, and it's important to be able to have the platform, especially amongst the youth, to talk about that, of how patriarchy is really entrenched in our society, especially in our traditions. So you have very sensitive topics that we would like to broach with our students, topics such as lobola, which is a dowry, the dowry system, and what that means in certain social contexts, and how do we get an understanding of that across the spectrum, regardless of whether you actually subscribe to that culture or you are a participant of that culture, you practice that culture. So that's really what it is so essential. It's to open that platform up on campus and to create awareness. And how do we, without discriminating against certain traditions or cultures, we want to really encourage people to start new traditions and new cultures, because they can change. And we believe that no culture, there's no such culture that should essentially sort of transgress a human right, and that's, we don't feel that culture should exist. So that's what our approach is. We have other events such as celebrating International Women's Month. So we really want to encourage people to talk about the solidarity that the sort of female community, international community has, regardless of their history or their diversity. So that there's solidarity in that element of that women are, the most have been identified as vulnerable in society. So we want to look at what are the commonalities across the globe, internationally, and where are our strengths, and how do we capitalize on our strengths in a global sense. And is there room for that? Are we giving enough space to women on a global platform to actually collaborate and to partner? And then we have a month completely dedicated to women's female participation in sport, and what the sort of disparity is between the pay for male sport and female sport. the airtime that male sport seems to receive more than what female sport does, and perhaps different practices in different societies internationally. Perhaps one country practices it differently and they have, perhaps it is more equal, and maybe other societies can then learn from that. Or so it's really essentially opening the platform to discuss those kind of issues. We have a couple of events as well, as I said before, our own projects. So we're collaborating with a NGO called NICRO, and they a crime and prevention organization. So they deal with juveniles who haven't been sent to juvenile detention yet, in the process of being rehabilitated, and it's a program where they seek to sort of protect children from, or juveniles from actually becoming hardened criminals, because the actual NGO believes that they are really the responsibility, and that it's only society that can sort of contribute or prevent children from falling into the system of to becoming hardened criminals. So we're actually working with them, and I think maybe Katie and Becca, if I could, this could perhaps reflect on some comments that you've made about integrating, integrating these projects with other genders, boys, girls, anybody who doesn't identify with those genders, as well as the LGBT community. So we really, it's great because when we work with these partners, they actually deal with entire schools. So it won't just be a group of girls within a school. We're dealing with, whoever is within that classroom, or the group of kids that they give us. And usually they don't just select the children who are sort of borderline cases. They sort of identify a class with a group of kids that are, both sort of well-rounded and also sort of have a positive impact in their class. And we're also talking about classes that don't have resources. So it'll be very essential for us to be able to, through our other partners, that we can provide them with those resources. Because you're looking at children who don't have access to science equipment, so they can't give science in those high schools because they just don't have access to that. So they call it a practical technology school, but actually it's just because they don't have the resources to give these kids the opportunity. So we want to provide them with certain, different other outlets other than going sort of resorting to criminal activity. So it'll be things like awareness and educational programs discussing rights and rights for the individual, not just rights for women and girls, but rights as a whole for, treating everybody equally, everybody's right to safety and security, and how as a community it's so important to support those rights and respect other people. So that's one of our big partners at the moment. We're running on a term basis, so it'll be over every 3 months. We'll be participating with those schools. And if anybody is interested, we would love your input on that. And then we have a couple of other partners where we will be working very closely with our university, with the Human Rights Desk, the Human Rights Commission within the Free State. So that's essentially what we're doing. We have a correspondent in Kwakwa, which is a very rural area. And that's really an area that's, those young girls are facing barriers to accessing education because of the lack of health and sanitation. So we would like to, and that's the plan at the moment, is actually to be able to go there and present workshops on health and sanitation, or be able to sort of commit to some kind of program where we can actually either raise the funds or connect them to an organization who does raise the funds to provide sanitary products, or transport is also an issue for them. So that's where we come in. We basically mediate between the organizations who do have those resources and who can fulfill that need, but we want to go in and identify that need. And it's also important that those young girls have mentors. So, we're busy setting up a mentor program. We have students from our university that they can actually sort of join in and participate when we travel to Kwakwa, because it's quite away from here. It's borders the country of Lesotho. So if anybody knows more or less where that is in South Africa, so that's it. Yeah, we're basically looking at workshops where we focus on that. How do certain workshops on sexual health, that sort of thing. It's very important. It's important also for young girls to be inspired to continue with tertiary education. And at the moment, that just doesn't seem a possibility for them, because we have a vicious cycle of, it's almost like this low socioeconomic, and here's where the economics comes to the fore. So you have this huge disparity of the majority of the population in South Africa. They are living below the breadline, and the majority of that majority is are young women and girls, and it's a single parent households where it's women headed households that are struggling financially, and it's this very vicious cycle where young women and girls are trapped in a low socioeconomic bracket because they simply can't break out of it. There aren't opportunities for tertiary studies. I'm not sure if anybody has been aware of it, but we've recently had a hashtag fees must fall movement in South Africa. I'm not sure if anyone's aware, but had campuses shut down and riots on the streets. So it's been quite a conflicting time for institutions in South Africa, where there's just access to them. It's just not a possibility.
Almost, access to education is more of a privilege than a right currently in South Africa. So it's something that needs to be changed, something that all the students right now are busy fighting for, but it's something that we're trying to change.
So it's also, it makes us, I think, it provides quite a challenge to what we are trying to achieve, especially encouraging girls to strive for tertiary institutions. But we can't create empty promises. We don't want to promise young girls an opportunity for tertiary education when there simply is not that possibility, because financially it's not obtainable in this country. So that's some of the challenges that we are seeking to deal with. But that is, to wrap it up, that's essentially what our campaign is aim is to also raise awareness, not necessarily on it's also those subtle gender inequalities. So for example, even sport on our campus, and I think it's very important to also be able to give women the space. Well, not even really, I mean, Katie, I think you raised a very valid point that it's so important to not over-polarize this. The spaces that we create, that we need to, our shared spaces need to be safe for everybody, no matter what gender you identify with, across the spectrum. So I think that's important, and I think we will definitely try to do that now in the future, is that in all our projects that we initiate, that we include the LGBT, not even just that, but that the sort of, even in our, in our advertisements or calls to actions, that we actually make sure it's not that polarized. So
that we kind of enforce the idea of we're all a human race, it's all a human right that we're trying to figure out, and not just women or men or, so that it's actually just everybody. We're all inclusive. We don't want to exclude anybody. We just want the bigger picture. If we all stand together, it will be easier, it will be better.
So to wrap up in our shoes campaign, what we'll do is we'll make it available, so we don't take too much time. We'll make it available on our webpage, there are targets for the Sustainable Development Goal 5 that we are trying to achieve through our various projects, and that ranges from trying to petition for better social protection services. So we also, one of our months is dedicated to raising awareness on domestic violence, as well as human trafficking. And we are also initiating a petition campaign for our police services to better the way they handle the cases, the domestic violence cases, because that's a severe problem within South African society, and I'm sure globally. So, you know, those sort of issues that we're trying to address, and it's important to be able to, I think, mobilize the youth to do that, because I think we are such key factors in instigating change. And that could be because students have so much time in their hands. And that could also be just because that I think, you know, we as a society, we are ready to make change. And yeah, I think it's important to capitalize on that. Yeah. So I think, okay, so if anyone wants to, you know, if anybody has questions on any of our projects, our various projects, we do have a Facebook page. It's #InOurShoes. So you're welcome to also email us or connect with us via our Facebook page. And we're really excited to collaborate with anybody and on any projects, especially Becca. I think we'll definitely be in touch with you. And then, so yeah, so to wrap that up, are there any questions that we could take now before introducing our guest speakers on women in social entrepreneurship?
I had like a thought about like the workshops that you guys are doing with like the young girls in South Africa. Just in terms of like the LGBT, maybe how you could like make it more LGBT inclusive. I'm not sure if it's possible in South Africa given the culture, but I think maybe like a powerful or more subtle way is to get, you know, you're trying to empower women, but you could get like a cisgender woman who identifies maybe as like bisexual or lesbian. Like the focus doesn't need to be about LGBT, but just having someone, you know, like who comes and talks to the girls about something else, but is openly comfortable with maybe their sexual orientation. I just think could be a powerful image for, you know, young girls. I just think that age is just such an important component of like an LGBT person, and like enforcing like a positive image of LGBT people early in someone's life it could be life-changing and very crucial. So, but I mean, those are great ideas for your campaign. Very impressed with your ideas.
Thank you so much, Katie. That's a very good suggestion. And we've actually contacted, we have an LGBT desk at our university. So they're quite willing to work with us. And we forgot to mention as well that we're petitioning for a gender neutral bathroom, which is actually—
Oh, that's great.
So the LGBT desk, it was quite funny how it worked out, because we had both thought of the idea at the same time, but we both need support on advocating for the same idea. So it would be great then to partner in that initiative. And
that's great, yeah.
Our support on both sides. Are there any further questions on our campaign? Any suggestions?
I think Becca is offline. She just messaged me. She said she's very interested in the campaign and wants to collaborate. So I'll send her your contact information so you can sort of further the discussion and talk with. You know, you can find links with. She's the first organization, and maybe work on something together. So, but it sounds great so far. We have some nice speakers coming up to discuss women in social entrepreneurship. So I'll let Kiara and LJ do the introductions. But
okay, so we have very interesting speakers. They're basically going to address women in social entrepreneurship, and that will be dealing with the SDG goals 1, which is addressing poverty, and 8, which is sustainable economic growth, as well as SDG 12, which is essentially the consumer. It's basically about the healthy consumer production and in the consumer market, and how does equality actually fit in there, and how do we create sustainable growth regarding equalities. Okay, so the first guest speaker is Zola Balashia. He will be presenting on the role of women in social entrepreneurship and its social impact. So he will be addressing those 3 SDGs. And then Zola is actually a master's student from the Central European University. He's originally from the UFS, so right at home here. And he's the founder of the Brain Cube projects, using debate as a tool for education and youth leadership in disadvantaged schools. Zola is also he's an avid debater, and he's also a social entrepreneur, and he's been quite successful in launching a number of projects here in South Africa, and one of which is Debate Africa, where he's really given an input into educating the youth, especially in disadvantaged areas, on training them in critical thinking skills and debate. So, Zola, if we could give it over to you for the next 10 minutes.
Hi, LJ. Hi, everyone. Thank you for a very kind introduction. Am I audible?
Yes.
Okay, great. I'm going to be very frank. I'm a realist. I'm a pragmatist. So I like to look at things not only from how they should be, but from how they are. And from my perspective, how things are doesn't look good in the status quo for women. And in the long run, there's no indication for some real change and some real success. Because although we have various rights and SDGs that aim to prioritize and empower women, the truth of the matter is there's a hierarchy, there is a pecking order. And when things seem to go wrong, often the first people that bear the biggest brunt of abject poverty, of financial exclusion, are women. And this is a problem because it still remains systemically, the institutions in society still remain systemically adverse to women and their needs. So I have a few ideas, some which are not very popular, but I'm fully behind, which I think can assist in uplifting women from the various issues they face. And these 2 ideas are ensconced in 2 areas, not that they're separate, but hopefully aim to consolidate these 2. One is which is an informal area, and I'm going to argue for informal corporations on various levels via social entrepreneurship. And the second one is a formal area, which we've seen various successes across the world with regards to feminist or woman political movement, and why this is quite important as it exists. So in the informal sector, where social entrepreneurship has a big role, is quite important in my view. I think one of the reasons why women aren't able to live themselves out of the poverty cycle is simply because they don't have enough social capital, they don't have enough social enterprise, they don't have enough social education, not only about their role and themselves, but how to do it as well. This is something I like to call intrapreneurship, where it's quite important that women should be able to spend on women. This is why, for example, in certain areas in South Africa and elsewhere around the world, obviously, often rather, the Chinese guy who's got a shop at the corner store knows the other Chinese guy who's got another shop down the street who helped him start that business and loaned it to him. It's this sort of mindset that I think should start to become gender adverse, where social entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs in business who make profit should start spending more on women. What would this mean exactly? This would mean that there should probably be a lot more effort in gaining and building capital and funding them towards education for girls in the community specifically. This would also mean gaining capital and funding employment, which is most likely adverse to women. For example, the textile industry, which is one of the entry points that's quite common for women to enter to gain some sort of income. If women were able to socially support these sorts of things, whether it's through direct capital or marketing or even purchasing, it will make this all the more valuable for women to engage in as worthwhile, and also bring it up in a formal sector in some way to say women are supporting women, and also get everyone else outside of that to support these sort of endeavors as well. Whether it's in the food industry, textile, clothes, etc., those sorts of industries are usually the ones where the poorest of the poor in low economic circles is the first engagement of economic activity, and that's quite important. Where I think social entrepreneurship has a role in terms of education is that there's this idea that going to school and everything is, neutral because we all learn the same thing, etc. That's not the case. It's quite important there is an explicit mentioning of the role of a woman in business, in any way that she'll end up, and in education, because it is not only her ability to be educated that's been challenged, it's her entire identity. Her potential to bring a child into this world is directly under attack when she can't be made CEO simply because she may or may not fall pregnant somewhere down the line. So I always get confused when I'm told, oh, did you hear what company X and Y are doing? It's great that they're allowing women to cryogenically freeze their eggs so they can continue in their work. I'm like, no, that's precisely the problem, is that we're expecting women more and more to behave like men to get some sort of success in this world. Right? So that sort of education is something that has to be made a lot more explicit. When we talk about consumption, we don't only speak about consumption as an individual, we talk about consumption in a household. And often consumption in a household is adverse to women. This means that in a family where there's boy children and girl children, the little bit of income that comes in is probably and most likely going to be spent on the male child. This is why that she often has to stay at home or do things like raise a child and take care of the house, etc., because any sort of income that comes in is spent on the male child. That's why it's important to build some sort of capital and funding that goes directly to the girl child, because her needs and her consumption needs are very unique and different, and is quite important. What also saddens me often is how there are various rights, especially, for example, in South Africa, to access to contraception from as early as 12 years old, whether it's for termination of pregnancy or other contraceptive methods. But curiously enough, there is no equal or equivalent right for girls to access female hygiene products, right? And this is something that is a lot more of an issue for the girls that live today, and not more of a potential issue, or however you might like to phrase it, right? So for me, it's quite important that the prioritizing of laws and rights has to be done in this manner as well. Two examples where this interest spending has been successful in the microfinance corporation. This collective action has been, for example, referred to in South Africa as stokvels, where there's common pooled resources to allow women and to allow girls to access things they wouldn't otherwise have been excluded from financially because of how it's adverse to them. It's quite important for women to be able to organize collectively in this manner so they can continue a strong basis for financial cooperation, so these institutions of trust can be built for women specifically. When we move into the formal level, I'm very much for a pro-feminist, pro-woman political party. And this is quite different from any female branch of existing political party or governance structure. Why? Because once again, when issues have to be prioritized, that branch gets, oppressed. But secondly, it's really damaging when there is a conflation of issues between what is uniquely requested and required by a woman and versus what's uniquely requested and required by society in general, right? So there's that internal tension again in prioritizing issues, whether it's rights, etc., with regards to women, and often it becomes adverse to them. So it's quite important to have an independent, autonomous political presence, not just political representation where we can point to a few female faces in parliament and say, okay, we're doing things right, right? It has to be a presence that allows for the mainstreaming of gender policy, that allows for the mainstreaming of gender-sensitive policy, because women are affected very different when it comes to employment. They're not just unemployed, they're structurally unemployed, right? The potential to get employment, even if she has education, is very different to that of a man. This is something gender-sensitive policy can sort out a lot more than general affirmative action policy. When we talk about crime in a country, women are probably the most vulnerable citizens, although they claim they have equal rights. They're more vulnerable citizens than any other place in the world in South Africa, simply because of being a woman and thus having the potential to be raped more often, more likely than not, right? This is a significant problem. This means a citizen of the country with equal rights is more in danger than anyone else. And this requires a law that targets that specifically, not just crime in general. We agree that, rapists should not be allowed to prevail in society or escape justice. But it also needs to take an angle from which women are generally the most vulnerable in society because of this crime as well. But most importantly, I would go for something like gender tax. I think something like gender tax would be completely justifiable, right? And I'm not sure if this exists in the world or whatnot. But I think when we're facing a disproportionate power imbalance, when we're facing a disproportional economic imbalance, when we're facing disproportional political and social imbalance, there has to be a redistributed mechanism that is impactful to allow for these groups to be able to access these other institutions of society. And until we get that level, the balance right, not only independently from social institutions and various levels of corporations, but on a formal level as well, we're in it for the long run. But I do have hope in some of the work I've done in various sectors of society that there is potential, there is passion, and the likelihood exists, especially in the youth who want to do something about this, who have great ideas about doing something about this. But it's going to take a collective effort from all of us, from women and from men as well. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Zola. I think we're going to keep the questions for afterwards. So jot those down so we can get that to Zola after we've spoken with Regine. So basically, Regine is a volunteers head of the Committee of Asian Youth Corporation, the official coordinating body for national youth institutions in Asian regions. She was based in Malaysia as Special Projects Officer for the USAID Asian Youth Volunteer Program. Regine's interests in women empowerment is built upon her feminist theory background during a Bachelor of Arts and Development Studies in the Philippines. She's currently focused on her advocacy as a facilitator for the Asian Youth Public Servants, a mobile school that seeks to build the capacity of potential youth leaders in the region. So we'd love to hear from you and hear your thoughts on this specific topic.
Great. Hi, everyone. Good evening from my side of the world, and good morning, I guess, from your side of the world. I'm going to be a bit brief because I'm actually a bit asthmatic tonight, so I have a hard time talking. But my friend is here, hopefully he's still here, Joey, and he will try to fill in with some of the topics that I'm going to discuss. So my presentation will be a bit specific. I'm going to share with you a few case studies in the ASEAN region. So I belong to the ASEAN region, which is often confused with the Asian region. But the ASEAN region is the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, which cover 10 countries in Southeast Asia. Just brief enumeration: Brunei, Cambodia, Indonesia, Laos, Malaysia, Myanmar, Thailand, Philippines, Vietnam. There. So I wanted to share with you at least 4 case studies to show how this social entrepreneurship works in different contexts. Because despite the fact that we're working with one sector, which is women, at least in the topic that I was given is about women. Women have different kinds of vulnerabilities and different levels, and they need different levels of capabilities depending on their contexts. So these are not my projects, just a disclaimer. These are projects that I've observed or I've volunteered for through the years. Okay, so the first part will be models on mainstream young women, so youth leaders in the urban and rural areas. The second part will be more for the vulnerable sectors: migrant workers, indigenous people, women in conflict areas. So for the first part, I'm going to share with my friend a little bit more about this ASEAN Youth Volunteer Program, which is a youth volunteer program by USAID and the ASEAN Secretariat. It provides capacity building, and it is also a grant giving body to youth organizations and youth projects that deal with several advocacies. One of them will be social entrepreneurship. And during that volunteer program, we follow a gender quota, which was quite controversial because the men in the house were like, why do you have to give women special preference, like a specific number of slots? And the explanation to that would be the gender quotas in programs help to ensure that women start on the same playing field as men, because considering that in many societies, women are already lagging behind in terms of education, etc., etc. So it is important for us to give them special preference naturally, because if you don't have as much educational background or work experiences as men, then naturally programs will accept more men than women. So that's why gender quotas are important in our case. And I hope Joey is here. He can elaborate a little bit more about the gender module. Joey. You're supposed to unmute yourself.
Yeah, he's online, but he's muted. I don't know.
Hello.
Oh, there we go.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Regarding the gender quota, when I was working with the AYVP then, one thing that really strikes on the issue of disparities about opportunities about men and women is about the access to education and social services. And when you don't put a gender quota, it doesn't give a so-called practical leverage for people, especially young women, to have a fighting chance between again in a selection process together with men with higher degree achievements and knowledge on certain issues, and also attainment in uh, socioeconomic stature. And this aspect, you should, in developing projects, in developing this type of projects, we have to take note that you have to have a guide in order for you to make things work. And also work on the issue of gender balance and gender equity, and in order for you to be really responsive on the issues of not just women but also with men. Because in the aspect, for example, the gender module of AYVP, we have designed that that participation rate should be at there must be at least, even though you cannot achieve maximum 50-50 male and female representation, at least you have a quota of 30% or to 40% of women participating in certain activities on projects and programs that the volunteers that were given grants by AYVP should be given to as a criteria for giving the grant. Also, another aspect is how many are you, when looking upon the gender module, is that are you involving what type of people in, are you just involving people from privileged areas, or are you involving communities? So it has a bias towards communities. Some people say that when you do this, this is a strategy called positive discrimination, in a way that those who you have a keen eye for the marginalized, in order for you to actually push forward a agenda of creating a leverage of advantage to the disadvantaged. But in that sense, sometimes it's still radical to be seen by other ASEAN countries, such as because you know that patriarchy is inherent in certain societies in ASEAN, and also views about women are quite different in different countries. So basically, that's the process. And Regine, would you like to add more?
All right, thank you. Maybe that's that for the ASEAN Youth Volunteer Program. But then moving forward, if you're a woman and you don't have capacity at all to even join these programs or to apply for a grant, then we'd have to specify or construct training programs specific to the needs of vulnerable sectors. So, for example, the first vulnerable sector would be, say, migrant workers in Singapore. So in Singapore, they have this micro business school called AIDA, which specifically caters to migrant workers, women migrant workers, who are more or less domestic helpers, maids, nannies, Filipino from Philippines or Indonesia working in Singapore. And what they do is every weekend or every time they have a day off, they go to this school. They learn specific skills to build their capacity. And these women will be mothers, even young professionals like as young as us, who need to go abroad to earn a living. And their specific context is that since they are the ones, these women are the ones working abroad, they assume, say, like more empowered positions in the family because they're the ones holding the money. But their problem is that they do not have the capacity to manage that money. So one problem that we saw was the lack of financial management skills. Like every time they receive their salaries, they needed.
Sino na naman yan? Sino yan?
Joey, please unmute yourself. So every time they get their salaries, they immediately. Wait, sorry, I have to talk to my friend. Unmute yourself, please.
Huh?
I'm so sorry.
I'm not sure. Joey, would you be able to try to say something so we can test to see if we can hear you?
Okay. So that's one problem. Like that's like quite a curious case because every time these women are the ones who are controlling the money in the household, but since they do not have the financial management capacity, every time they get their salaries, they immediately just either buy presents for the family or send it off. So they're not able to save sustainably. So what this micro business school does is, one, to teach them that financial management skill, and also to teach them business skills so that when they've already saved enough, they can go back home and start their own business and be with their families and then, live more sustainable lives. So that's AIDA. It's volunteer based. If ever you drop by Singapore, then you can always volunteer for a day or two in their various listing of courses. Then the second sector will be indigenous people. So in Thailand, they have quite a number of hill tribes, indigenous people from different ethnicities who still live in the mountains. And their particular context is that they have, apart from the need to sustain themselves economically, they also have a heritage to preserve. So they have their indigenous culture to preserve. And in Chiang Mai, in particular, North Thailand, what we found was the women actually play key roles in preserving their heritage because they are the weavers in the community. So the indigenous people, they document. Why is my friend not listening to me? Okay, so in the mountains, interestingly, like, because I also have to add a side point. Like, usually when we talk about women or vulnerable groups, we highlight their weakness versus appreciating their existing strengths. So take, for example, a while ago, I mentioned the migrant workers in Singapore. In their case, they are the leaders of their families, the leaders of the households, and what they needed was financial management skills. Now, for the indigenous people, the women in the mountains in Thailand are the ones who take charge in preserving heritage because the men are busy with, agriculture. So the women document their heritage, their cultural stories through the weaving patterns. If you've seen, like indigenous tribal patterns. So that skill is inherited generation after generation by the women. And since they already have that skill, that art, the skill that they needed was marketing. So marketing skills so that they can earn from their art or earn from their heritage and sustain themselves because, times are changing. They also have to, and they also have to be economically sustainable one way or another. And they also need social capital, like connections on where and who to sell their products to. So the capacity building program there in Thailand was focused on that, like teaching them marketing and that while not compromising their heritage advocacy and also linking them to the right people. Then finally, one other sector that I'd like to share would be women from conflict areas from my hometown, Philippines. So there's this one is a social enterprise called Salam Microfinance. It's a microfinance organization that lends Sharia compliant loans to Muslim women entrepreneurs from conflict areas. So their specific context is, one, they come from conflict. They used to come from a conflicted community. And two, they come from a particular religious cultural background, which is Islam. And in Islam, we cannot partake in interest transactions. So we cannot borrow from banks that charge interest. So in this case, their particular need is access to credit for their businesses so that they can move on with their lives after going through the conflict that they've been through, but without compromising their identity. And so this is what this social enterprise is trying to do, like to provide them access to credit without interest through this profit sharing model that's based on Sharia. And then it's also related to SDG 16, like trying to build resilience against violence and extremism, because violence is rooted in not only poverty, but also a sense of identity crisis. Like if people or these communities from these people from conflict areas or conflict communities find it difficult to move on after conflict because they do not find access, or they do not have a space to be themselves because they do not have access to things that they need. Like, for example, in this case, access to credit. Then they resort to organizations that make them feel welcome, which would be, alternatively, extremist movements. So it's all connected. Reflecting upon it, like also in general, the SDGs are all connected to each other. And so, on a final note, I just like to say that because my personal advocacy is human development, and human development defined by Amartya Sen means that people are able to live the lives that they value or have reason to value. And I specifically chose to focus on economic empowerment because it is an important, economics or money is an important part of empowerment to give people, to expand people's choice sets and to give them more opportunities to explore their careers, their ways of living, livelihoods. But it shouldn't work the other way around, that you empower people so that they will become an economic value to the society. But it should be, you give people the capabilities they need, the resources they need, which includes economic power, so that they can fulfill the life that they want to live. That's about it. Thank you.
Thank you so much to both our speakers. That was extremely interesting. I'm sure we all have many questions. So if I could just open up the floor for questions to be posed to both Zola and Regine, as well as Joey, if you would like to answer any of the questions, if he is still available. Thank you once again. Very interesting. And could we have any questions from the floor? And then we'll just open it up now. Okay, well, I think I'll take the first opportunity.
Oh, you want to go? Okay, sure, go ahead.
Oh, okay, so sorry, Donovan. Okay, so Regina, actually, I had a question to ask on the social entrepreneurship projects. Are there any which you could perhaps elaborate on or give us an example of, perhaps something in your own community or something that you have been involved with? Sort of what was the success rate of those social entrepreneurship projects, and how did you sort of find, was it easy for the not easy, but was it quite a challenge for the participants of that project to initiate? Did they need to sort of have a business planning course where they initiated these ideas? What with these ideas for the project's collective? Was it in a sort of specific community, or was it sort of more individual based? So just a little bit more of an explanation of a social project that was successful and could perhaps be practiced in other societies across the globe.
Sure. Okay, to start off, definitely there were challenges. I was particularly involved with the ones in Thailand for the indigenous people, and the one for women in conflict areas here in the Philippines. And for both, it took time for the communities to adjust with what they were already used to. Like, for example, for the indigenous people in the mountains in Thailand, like when we organized a marketing training, which was still based on consultation. Like, of course, we talked to the local leader. We had a survey with the community. What do you need? And so yada yada. So we did our homework. But then when we already implemented it, like these marketing concepts are new things for the indigenous people. So it took time for them to absorb it. But I guess that's the value of partnership. Like that's why we use the term community engagement versus community service, because community service sounds more one way than community engagement. Like with community engagement, you try to feel how both sides are doing. You know what I mean? Like you get a sense of where the community is right now, and you have to be very flexible with your framework, which is why like we don't do blueprints that are rigidly implemented across different communities. Like it has to be something that's your programs should be very fluid, and then that can change from time to time. Like when the community is having a hard time to absorb the ideas, then you have to take a step back. You have to do it again, do the same training program again, maybe with less concepts at once, or maybe it's a constant process of dialogue. Like always, so after every session, there's an evaluation. Always talk to the community, and they also listen to you and try to meet halfway. And also the same thing with the women from conflict areas in the Philippines. In their case, like people from conflict areas are like a bit stressed and are under stress, and they could be difficult to deal with. So that's, I guess, maybe it helps to have psychology aspect to it. That's why development studies is very interdisciplinary. Like even if it's social entrepreneurship, of course, that's why it's called social entrepreneurship. You don't just have the business expertise in it. Like you have to have inputs from social work and, like people who have community background, a little bit of psychology. It has to be very holistic. So I guess those are my 2 points. Like one, the program has to be fluid and adjustable, and 2, it has to be holistic.
Thank you so much again, Regine. Thank you for really comprehensively answering those questions. If we could have just one question, if we could limit one question to Zola, because we must move on to the presentations from the best practice fellows. So one question to Zola, and then we quickly need to move on to the next half of the session.
I have a question, unless someone else wants to, I don't want to take someone else's opportunity. Do you have some? Yeah, go ahead. Samantak?
So I had a small question because I think Zola put across a point where, he said that probably, to work towards a positive political culture in the country, there should be a pro-feminist, 100% female-oriented political party, which would, I believe, if I heard correctly, would be completely represented by female politicians, by female members of by female representatives of the public. So I wanted to ask a question: does this not kind of, in another way, isn't this a polarized reply to a polarized problem in a way? When you're talking about masochism and talking about a misogynistic culture where, there's a lot of patriarchy, are you not replying with a very extreme feministic situation response? Because what happens with a completely female-oriented political party is that there are no checks and balances to how that political party operates from the inside. So what eventually happens is there are always there is always an opportunity for extremist points of view to grow and grow into a big issue. So there might be one female politician who really thinks about, hey, let's burn men on the streets when they even look at us. And there's no checks and balances. I'm not saying that women are going to think like that. I'm not saying that. But all I'm saying that shouldn't there be shouldn't the solution be like have a political party where the representation of women as opposed to men in terms of the leading board of directors or the controlling board of the political party, maybe 50% can be women and 50% can be men, so that both groups can have a proper clash among themselves, a positive working culture where they clash among themselves inside the political party and come out with a solution eventually, which is much more toned down and really empathetic towards the situation on the ground. So my simple question is, shouldn't there be a checks and balances in place and not a completely female oriented political party?
Hi, thank you for the great question. My response is as follows. When this world was constructed, it was constructed to the exclusion of women. It was deeply rooted systemically to continuously exclude women, and only when they decided to allow women in certain industries, then they gave. So it's not only a question of the presence of women, it's a question of power. And if they control power, for as long as we completely remove women from the ability to autonomously control power, we will only see the same systemic backlash. Now, in India, there's a womanist party as well, and the United Women Front. Now, those are great examples because there's something specifically born out of not only the female agenda, but also out of the female psyche, right? Because it's a completely different perspective to be able to politically push those things forward. Now, there's also a general fundamental misunderstanding of feminism and what it is, and it's always perceived as like the extremist response to patriarchy. That's not even the case, right? It's perfectly possible that you can have male representative or even male leadership in female political parties. The fundamental difference in this cooperation or the female branch, as what you've described, already happens in status quo, is that because they don't command enough of autonomy and power, they can always easily get shut down when political decisions get tough, right? So the reason why this independence is important there, because it must be a presence that has to be controlled by women for women as well. But most importantly, look, in most countries, in fact, in the world, women form at least 50% of the constituencies of human beings that exist on this planet. It's completely unreasonable why there are certain things. I'll give an example with the gender pay gap, when some of my favorite movies are starred by women leading the role. But you can see a male actor who doesn't do half as good a job, in my opinion, or the critics, for example, but doesn't get the same pay gap as the female actor. The problem here is that this prejudice is not rational. It's not a failure of policy. It's an ideology, a cultural thing that cannot be snubbed aside by cooperation. It has to be a violent uprooting of the system. It has to be a challenge of existing institutions. And if men want to join their challenge, by all means, but it should not be dependent on the participation of men or the generosity of men to allow women to push forward their issues. That's why I'm always for the more extremist push, as opposed to let's wait until they allow us to do this. And I think women have demonstrated this ability over the years. This is how they were able to capture the right to vote for themselves. This is how they've won various labor issues and employment issues across the board as well, because the rationale to justify their exclusion is falling apart quickly. And it's a power they need to capture, and men can help if they want. But if they don't, that's fine as well.
Okay, thank you so much for that. Great questions, and I think that's really insightful responses from both of our speakers. Unfortunately, we need to move on quickly to the best practice leaders. If you guys could start with that now. Thanks.
There was a bit of an interconnection issue. I couldn't hear. Could you just repeat? I'm so sorry.
No, it was Samantha. Are you going to be leading the best practice session?
I don't know. I mean, we haven't really thought about who's going to lead. But yes, I believe all of us are going to speak in the 10-minute, in that 10-minute frame that has been allocated for us. So I think we can possibly go forward in a random fashion. And I think there are 4 fellows which are attending today based on the mails that have been circulated. So maybe me or somebody can start off and then one of us can follow. We have basically thought about speaking about, particularly about leadership transition, which is a particular issue that has been plaguing most of us. And thankfully enough, we could all match up and say, hey, I think we would all love to talk on that particular topic. So all of us have different, opinions based on the different dynamics that we are part of in our respective student organizations and countries. So in that particular sense, Nee, if you want to start off with the proceedings, maybe I can follow up after that.
So hi everyone, my name is Nee, and I'm gonna say a few words before leaving because I have a class soon. So for me, I am an international student from Vietnam, and I'm currently studying in New York. And when I'm here, it's very different because for the first time I take on leadership roles, and I experience culture shock because while studying in the environment in the United States, I still live with my parents who still have some expectation of me. Like, for example, if you are a girl, then you are supposed to, for example, you're supposed to cook, you're supposed to spend time learning this skill, which are, which women are supposed to know. You're supposed to end your study at a certain age so that you can get married and all that. But because I go to school and then I take on some leadership roles, then I find myself in a very struggling position when I feel like I don't know what to follow. I don't know if I should follow what my parents asked me to do, or I should follow what I want to do, like finishing my education, trying to reach for higher study. So that is the position I am in. And I'm still thinking about that because because I really do not want to hurt my parents by telling them that this is what I want to do. Sometimes I feel like I'm hurting them, but I don't know if I'm hurting them or not. So that is my position right now.
Hi, so Nee, would you want to add in something about maybe the leadership transition bit, or maybe then after which I could take up, after which I could speak?
As for the leadership transition, so I am from UNICEF, from my university called St. John's University in New York, and we recently founded the UNICEF Campus Initiative in St. John's University, and last year we had another president, we had another vice president and secretary and treasurer, and then this year suddenly a lot of people transferred. The president transferred to another university, and we have just new people stepping up to take roles, and it has been so difficult because we don't know what the specific roles for each president is, for the roles is. And the new president, which is Sabina, she is also here, and she has to step up and establish the roles as well as the responsibility that each person has to follow. It has been sometimes very chaotic, and we along the process we have learned a lot of lessons because so much has happened.
Great, me. In terms of my organization, I'm Samantak. I'm from India, and my organization is called Quote. We basically, we use debating as a tool to actually, develop a sort of intellectual discourse in the university and outside. Because in India, the biggest problem with most of our, campuses is that there is a lot of variability in the way, pertinent social topics, political topics, and so on and so forth are handled. Students are always really, they're always, kind of asked to really, work towards, the jobs, careers, and so on and so forth, and all that is really fine. But what really ends up is, because of a myopic way of conducting academics, the students themselves develop a a myopic view about the immediate world around them. And that was the issue that we kind of found out, and we wanted to really, start working towards it. And the debating society was a very basic thing that we thought was very pertinent towards taking a baby step towards creating a proper a culture of intellectual discourse. And before this, I was I was a social entrepreneur. I started an organization called Consumer Awareness and Solutions Enterprise, which in India looked into free delivery of consumer grievance redressal. So a lot of these big companies do their consumers and they can't do anything about it. So we helped everybody, right from the people at the bottom of the pyramid to the top, to get free consumer grievance redressal. So leaving that aside, that's not pertinent to the discussion. After which I joined this particular institute and I joined the social and entrepreneurship cell here. I was working with them for some time, and then we realized that there are certain villages around the place where we are situated, and they're very backward. And because we're MBA students, we are probably the future leaders of the country, or that is what is argued. So we have a responsibility of doing something, or at least creating a discussion about this particular thing. So that kind of made me and my co-founder, Ali, who is also an MCN fellow with me, Trisha. So she and I, we both got together and decided, hey, we should do something about creating a debating, kind of a society here, and using debating as a tool to really, creating a conversation between the MD students here and the villages that is in the vicinity. That is why I really liked what Zoya was talking about. Debate Africa is something that really hits us. It's something that's kind of resonates with us. And there are two things. I just wanted to give a little background about the thing before really talking about the topic of the day. Firstly, leadership transition. Yes, we are a baby organization, and this is the first year we actually got on board a junior board. And based on the dynamics and the composition of the batch in place, the representation of male is to female is 1:3, where there's one lady representative and there are 3 male representatives. In terms, the reason that we've done this is because as founder members, one is a female, one is a male, and we realized that there are certain topics that when you talk about, there are certain topics, for example, some of the speakers today talked about sanitation, hygienic sanitation in terms of menstruation. So now that's a topic which men can debate on, but well, I'm pretty sure they won't be able to give great insights because quite plainly we don't know much about it. So in that way, she was a big help. She brought on board very, very good topics, pertinent topics which we could have actually worked on. I brought in my set of topics that I was particularly crazy about. So that in itself showed that the composition of topics and events that we were doing, that really showed the diversity that we're bringing into the game. Eventually, that is also exhibited in the junior board that we have brought into the game. And I hope these guys are going to do good work because currently they are shadowing us and we're helping them really become a stronger team. Eventually, we have also given them complete autonomy in terms of getting more board members. And the way we've delegated the work is that, we've given the lady the main job of finding out more ladies in the campus who are, really, conscious and really, gunning for particular types of topics. Like sanitation is a very, very, very important topic from where I come from in India. And they talk a lot about hygienic sanitation here. So, topics like these, these are topics that men in India would feel a bit awkward to talk about. So the lady here, she actually gets on board, gets people together, with working towards creating student debating events which look into those topics in particular. And secondly, something that I really wanted to finish off with is we are one of the reasons we started off this organization was to use debating as a tool for social good, like I said before. And in that particular perspective, based on a chance interaction with a lady sweeper, she's one of the non-teaching staff, a member of the non-teaching staff in the campus here. We had a chance interaction with her, and she said, hey, a lot of us here face a lot of issues at home. When we go back, we're the only earning members, and we've got like drunk husbands, and who really squander the money, and so on and so forth. It really doesn't work well for us. So hey, we thought, we have a word called panchayat, PANCHAYAT. So the panchayat system is basically a very unique model that is homegrown here, where every village has its own governing council, a leader, which is like the leader of the village, and then it has its own little board of directors, if I might call it, and then the villages. So all the villages come with their issues. Everybody sits together under a banyan tree, in a circle, and they all talk about the topics openly, frankly. Justice is meted out, so on and so forth. So we decided we'll simulate this panchayat model in the college by bringing all the lady non-teaching staff, whoever works here, sweeps, cleans, cooks the food, whatever it is. We plan to bring all of them together. And along with that, we plan to bring some of the lady MBA graduates, fellow students who are working with us. So we're bringing these students with these non-teaching staff ladies who come from the villages. So we're getting them together to simulate a panchayat or a bonfire sort of a setup where everybody sits together on the ground and they just talk. They don't talk in English. They don't talk in a very suave manner, but they talk in the local dialects. They talk in Hindi. They talk in the local dialect called Marathi. So this is the whole idea that we are yet to implement. We're planning to implement the first such session next month. So I'm really proud with the way in which this particular event is progressing, and I really wanted to put it out across to the community here, in case anybody has any ideas or anything, or any which way they wish to collaborate with us on this particular matter. Handing over the mic to Sabina.
All right. Hi guys. Can you hear me? Hi. So my name is Sabina. I am the president of UNICEF at St. John's University. I'm also a fellow at the Millennium Campus Network. Just to start off, I'll say that I this year, as just to comment back on what Nee said, this year UNICEF is a brand new organization. We just got recognized by our university last semester in the fall. And that was definitely a very difficult position to be placed in as a very new president, never having been taken an executive role before. And the fellowship definitely helped with, us learning leadership transition skills and learning how to kind of just delegate and kind of make sure that every single person on the team is, being the roles and the responsibilities are being laid out for them, and it's important to kind of just look at the team members individually and see what to their what their skills are, and kind of understand that your organization, so that you can look at their skills and not overwhelm them in a way, and just to kind of improve them on those specific skills that they do have. Being a new president, it was very overwhelming because it was, it was definitely very overwhelming going into, global development. And just even if it's a small organization on our campus, it's very difficult, and especially being a girl, 21-year-old girl, just all of a sudden in this position where she's delegating, where she's in this leadership role. It was very, very difficult, and it was definitely a struggle at first, and kind of I had to pause and kind of assess, like, what what is it that is stopping me? Because I did find myself, which I never thought I would be able to, because I mean, I don't know if you guys can relate to that, but it's difficult because sometimes girls especially, they don't want to come off as authoritative, and they don't want to come off as bossy or whatever, all those negative terms that are associated with us, even though when we're just simply doing our jobs, just like we're in a role where we're delegating simple tasks, can be looked at as being just negative, and just being this person's bossy or whatever, or as opposed to a male doing the same exact thing, they would be looked at as, oh wow, this person is so hardworking, or just positive, positive, being associated as being given positive feedback. So just for the leadership roles, so gender inequality is definitely an issue that we definitely deal with, and then especially in roles where where we are in global development, and we're trying to in our jobs, or in our student organizations, or things like that, in our everyday lives. And just to comment on Donovan, what you said earlier was pertaining to the Sustainable Development Goals, was that by the year 2030 we will be the key bearers to these goals, and the best way to kind of go about completing them is to simply raise awareness, and that's what kind of our mission at UNICEF has been. I know that oftentimes in student organizations, or in organizations, nonprofit organizations that work for global development, sustainable development, they often political aspects get into the way, and that can often sidetrack you from your mission, from looking at the bigger picture of what we want to achieve. For example, for UNICEF to educate, advocate, and fundraise for children in developing countries, and making sure that they have every single, nothing is stopping them from getting an education, from getting access to, simple things like clean water, or just basic human rights. So, one of the things that I learned that I would like to share with all of you is just to remember that being grounded in like what your mission is, or why you're doing what you're doing. We're doing amazing things in global development, and a lot of our fellows are definitely every single organization that they're part of, they are working towards the Sustainable Development Goal, and trying to help make it a reality. So it's always good to just look back at what your mission is, and just to help use that to build your foundation, and just to strengthen that. And for UNICEF, I found that it was very helpful for me to kind of just simply make our foundation to simply raise awareness, because we're a non-budgeted organization, which means that we don't get any funds from the university or anything. So, things often get complicated, and we do, face a lot of issues. However, if we just look back and look at our simple mission of just simply raising awareness, we do, we can get along, go on a long way, and good things will eventually come. So I guess I would just like to conclude with that, and thank you guys.
So guys, if you I think Nee has left the house, so if you guys have any questions for me and Sabina, or Sabina.
Thank you all so much. That was really insightful. I think what we will do is we will connect our social networking audience and all our partners with each of you, so that if they have any questions to respond to, or for example, we can put what you've just shared on our social media, and that we can then receive responses from there, just so that we can wrap up this session, because I'm sure it's getting a bit long in the tooth for everybody now, and I wouldn't want to keep any one of you away from your commitments today. So what I could perhaps end with, and just a comment from our side, is that this is so important to talk about transitional leadership, especially in the context of gender, I think I'd say power play within leadership roles. And I think that it speaks to these scenarios that you've actually shared, also speaks to the fact that we should be sensitive to gender power positioning within leadership roles. So Samantha, for an example, I could perhaps maybe give a suggestion that with this female member in your team, perhaps instead of or three of you males suggesting to her that she should deal with these certain specific kinds of themes or topics, because the males don't necessarily, they might find, for example, sanitation, female sanitation, a difficult topic to handle. Perhaps challenge yourselves to actually sort of gain knowledge on that, and maybe that's really essentially where this change can come from, is if we all take it as an opportunity to challenge ourselves in these different ways, challenge yourself to, and also to, in Nee's case, maybe to break the mold, to perhaps sort of maybe initiate, community, certain community conversations where the parents could also join in, and where they could discuss, the future of their daughters and perhaps the benefits thereof. So I think it's important that we all as individuals take this opportunity in leadership positions to challenge ourselves to question those gender stereotypes. So that's just one comment on my side.
Yeah. So just a small clarification. I didn't want to be very verbose, although I believe I was a bit. But the point is, the way I wanted to put it across is that it's kind of like a staggered approach that we have taken. Firstly, it's like this, that right now nobody wants to talk about it. It's kind of like because in India, there's like lots of strong views about lots of conservative stuff. I can make a whole dictionary out of it. But the point is, so there's like, let's say, female sanitation. Okay, so the point is, it's a really taboo topic, even in a proper educated atmosphere like ours. So the point is, rather than jumping into it completely by bringing in a completely immersive sort of an environment, the idea is let the women champions take it forward and start being the stimulus of discussion. So once she, as a leader, creates a pool of more sub-leaders and they start creating the conversation, then we start getting together an audience, more debaters, more public speakers, so on and so forth, who come in. And these people who come in, who gravitate slowly, they could be anybody. They could be men, women, anybody. So the point is, we're trying to make it a staggered and smooth approach, where right now, when there is nothing, we get the women to be the stimulus and be the creators of change. Once they have initiated the discussion, what happens is there is a natural gravitation of everybody coming together and trying to talk about it now as a community. So we want the women to show the men how they should be led, how they should talk about such topics, because they are the experts there. So they should help us learn, rather than us stumbling across all the way, which is also fine. But I'm just saying, this is kind of like a smooth little curve in a place where conservatism is the, world order.
Okay, well, thank you so much for your response to that comment. I think what we'll do is this is probably a very good topic, perhaps, transitional leadership within youth platforms, something that we can open a platform on social media to further discuss this, and also, your initiatives as well. So, stay in touch with us, connect with us on Facebook. We'd love to further discuss, your projects as well. And as well as both thank you to Sabina and me. If we could lend any support from our side, we're always available and willing to connect. So thank you again. Thank you for this opportunity. And then we'll say goodbye from our side. Thank you for the riveting and very informative Global Forum. Thank you for all the input from everybody.
Yeah, I just want to thank everyone as well for this great forum, especially, the In Our Shoes campaign for, working together with the Youth for SDGs campaign. I think it helped make it a powerful global forum for everyone and informative. And hopefully you can share this video with your networks as well. And just to finish off, something we heard at the Millennium Campus conference back in the summer, speakers mentioned that as a society, we can't move forward if we're disenfranchising 50% of our population. So that's sort of a powerful way to realize the importance of gender equality and its cross-cutting role within sustainable development. And then the last thing is that, for the agenda for 2030, the outcomes of the agenda is not the world we want, even though that's what built the SDGs, but rather is the world we deserve. It's the efforts, the dedication, the passion, and then ourselves, what we put into actionable work on the ground, activism and all that, that will really determine what the landscape of our society will be in 2030. So with that, really want to encourage everyone to continue with their initiatives and share with us. We want to keep the discussion going, hear how the updates are progressing, and look forward to more further discussions altogether. So thank you to everyone for joining, and hope we can stay connected as well through these different networks.